The second phase is the preliminary documentation and evaluation of the scene. And this is where we end up showing up at some point. Now, remember, in the last phase, the first responder turned this over to an investigator. So now we have an investigator on the scene. So the investigator is going to conduct a crime scene assessment. We also are probably arriving at this point, and so we are going to be involved in this crime scene assessment, and the detective is going to do a walkthrough and even take us on a walkthrough. So this initial walkthrough is where we go through and get our initial observations. And then there is note taking and logs. So these are the main points in this phase. So let's talk about each one. The scene assessment. So this is where the investigator kind of takes into consideration all that's there. Do I need CSIs to respond? If I do, how many do I need? Should I make assignments? So the investigator in charge is going to identify responsibilities, share preliminary information with those who arrive to assist, develop investigative plans in accordance with department policy and laws. And you may be involved in this, you're going to be given an assignment. Now, does this mean that that detective is looking over your shoulder your entire time? Probably not. The detective has better things to do with their time. They trust you, you're trained. They just say, here it is, go to it. And you do it. Crime scene searches. The primary duty of law enforcement is to uphold the Constitution of the United States while safeguarding the lives and property of the public who have placed their trust in us. This trust must never be broken or taken for granted. If we do something improperly, that can suppress evidence later. And one of those things is searching the crime scene for evidence without a warrant when we need it. So let's talk about crime scene searches and the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment states this: the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. This is the Fourth Amendment. It establishes a privacy interest by recognizing the right of U.S. citizens to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects. And secondly, it protects the privacy by prohibiting searches and seizures that are unreasonable or not authorized by a warrant based upon probable cause. And third, it states that no warrant shall be issued unless the warrant describes exactly the place to be searched and the things or persons to be seized. Crime scenes are usually processed after receiving consent or a search warrant. When in doubt, always get a search warrant. A search warrant does not apply to open fields, abandoned property, semi-private areas, and in some cases, vehicles. It's really simple to get a search warrant. There's always a judge on call, and there's always the district attorney to help out. In fact, many locations, the district attorney has DAs assigned to respond to crime scenes upon request, and especially if there's a homicide. In fact, they insist that you call them if you have a suspected homicide, and a DA always will respond to your scene to help you through any of these legal issues. The second point on this phase 2 is we conduct a scene walkthrough and initial documentation. This is where we're going to have an overview of the entire scene that identifies any threats to scene integrity, ensures protection of physical evidence. Keep in mind, written and photographed documentation provides a permanent record. A walkthrough should only be completed if it's not going to disturb the evidence. The investigator in charge will conduct a walkthrough of the scene. The walkthrough shall be conducted with the individuals responsible for processing. The detective is going to have certain information by the time we get there. The detective is going to say, okay, let's look at the scene and point out certain things. This is where we have our notepads out. We're taking notes. This is what we're observing. We write down everything. We get an idea of what the crime scene is all about. We see how we're going to have to process. And when we're all done with that walkthrough, we can then huddle up and say, okay, this is how we're going to do it. So you might show up with 2 other CSIs and you do the walkthrough, all of you together, and then you come out of the crime scene and you say, okay, well, we need to divvy up some responsibilities. And then you go through methodically and process the scene. As you're making those notes, as you first go through, you're recording things like what lights are on and off, what windows are opens or closed, the curtains, the temperature, odors you notice. The 4th point here is note taking and logs. We do a lot of note taking. Keep in mind that note taking and logs are going to provide a permanent record of the crime scene activities. Now, kind of fast forwarding to writing the report, you will use your notes to then write your report, your formal report. But you also will keep your notes because they usually will have a little more detail, and those can be useful later. So notes are very important and they become a permanent record of your crime scene. Also, you take your notes to court with you. Then when you finally write your report, those are formally written, usually in the first person, active voice, and in past tense. Another thing is the entry log. This is important to have to keep unwanted people out of your crime scene. The entry log is started early on. The name of anyone who enters the crime scene goes down, the date, the time, who they're from, what agency, and the reason they went in the crime scene. And then they also sign it. And then the date, time when they go out, and write down anything that they took with them. The important thing here is you've got a log that you can go back to and say, these people were in here during these times. This is what they did and why they were there. It also keeps people out, because if they have no reason to be in there, they don't want to be in your report, but they will be because they're forced to sign the entry log. This is what all I do when I have a crime scene. I have this column down the left on my notepad. That's handy because I can put the time on each line. So this is the time when I did this or observed this or collected this or photographed this. I have on the page the case number and the page number because I'm going to use multiple pages. And then I just write them down as I do things, keeping track of everything. Now, this far right column that I draw, that's to flag my attention. So let's say that I write down something and I say, I need to come back to that before I leave. I need to remember to come back and do something. So in that right column, I'm going to write a note to myself. Then when I'm all done with the crime scene, I can flip back through my notes and look at all the flags and say, oh, I got to remember to do that. And then make sure I do that because it's something that is out of order that I have to do later.